The webcam ghost. The webcam light turned on by itself at 1:58 a.m. I noticed it because the room was otherwise completely dark. I hadn't been using the computer. I was in bed, half awake, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling where the streetlight outside bled through the curtains. My laptop sat closed on the desk across the room, its black surface barely visible. And yet, that small white LED beside the camera clicked on, steady, unblinking. At first, I didn't move. My brain reached automatically for explanations. Background updates, a glitch, some app waking itself up. I worked remotely. Video calls were part of my life. The webcam activating wasn't impossible. Just not like this. Not with the laptop closed. I sat up slowly, the mattress sighing beneath me. The light stayed on. I waited for the screen to glow, for the fan to spin, for any other sign of activity. Nothing happened, just the camera light. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Technology does strange things at night. Sleep makes you dramatic. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and crossed the room, every step feeling louder than it should have. Up close, the laptop looked exactly as I'd left it. Closed. Cool to the touch. No vibration, no hum. The camera light stared at me anyway. I opened the laptop. The screen flickered to life, blindingly bright in the dark room. My reflection stared back at me in the black loading screen, pale and half asleep. Then the desktop appeared. No apps were open, no recording software, no browser tabs, no notification explaining why the webcam had activated. The light stayed on. My chest tightened. I clicked through my settings, my hands steady but cold. Camera permissions, privacy controls, everything looked normal. No unfamiliar programs, no signs of remote access. Finally, after nearly a full minute, the webcam light turned off. Just like that. No warning. No explanation. I shut the laptop and stood there for a moment, listening to my own breathing. The room felt the same as it always had. Quiet, small, familiar. The kind of space that had learned my habits. I told myself it was nothing. I went back to bed. Sleep didn't come easily after that. I kept picturing the tiny light in the dark, imagining it flicking on again the moment I closed my eyes. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were shallow and fractured, full of screens that wouldn't turn off. Faces frozen mid-expression, eyes staring straight through glass. In the morning, the laptop behaved perfectly. No lights, no heat, no mysterious activity in the system logs. I even ran a malware scan out of nervous habit. Nothing came up. By noon, embarrassment had replaced fear. I told myself I'd imagined the whole thing. That night, I taped a small square of paper over the webcam. It felt silly, but comforting. A physical barrier, a boundary. The paper fluttered slightly when the air conditioner kicked on, reassuringly real. I went to sleep easily. I woke at 2:01 a.m., not suddenly, not from a noise, just awake. The room was dark. The streetlight cast its familiar glow. Everything felt normal, until I noticed the desk. The webcam light was on, white, steady, shining through the paper. My heart dropped. I sat up slowly, eyes locked on the desk. The paper I'd taped over the camera was still there, perfectly in place. I could see its outline clearly, and yet the light bled through it, diffused but undeniable. The laptop was still closed. I didn't get out of bed this time. I watched. Minutes passed. My eyes adjusted to the dark. The light didn't flicker or dim. It stayed on, unwavering, like it had all the time in the world. I became aware of something else then, something subtle but deeply wrong. The light wasn't pointing outward. It was pointing at me. The realization made my stomach tighten. I couldn't explain why I felt that way. Light doesn't have direction like that. It spills, it scatters. But this felt focused, intent. I reached for my phone, keeping my movements slow. The screen lit my hands faintly as I checked the time. 2:07 a.m. When I looked back at the desk, the webcam light turned off. Then I didn't sleep again that night. The next day, I unplugged the laptop completely. Power cable out, battery removed. I left it sitting on the desk like a harmless piece of plastic and metal. That evening, before bed, I checked it again. No light, no activity. I slept. At 1:58 a.m., something softly clicked. I opened my eyes to darkness and the glow of the webcam light. Still on, even unplugged. My breath came shallow and fast. I stared at the desk, trying to understand what I was seeing. The paper was still taped over the camera. The laptop was still closed. The battery sat on the far side of the desk where I'd placed it earlier. The light shone anyway, and then the laptop lid began to open. Not fast. Not all the way. Just enough for the screen to wake. The display glowed dimly, adjusting itself. And for a moment, I saw my own reflection again. Lying frozen in bed, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. Then the screen changed. The webcam feed filled the display. It showed my room, from the desk, from the camera's point of view. I was on the screen, lying in bed, watching myself watch it. The image was grainy, slightly delayed, but unmistakably live. I didn't move. On the screen, I didn't move either. The timestamp in the corner read 1:58 a.m. Then, slowly, another shape appeared in the frame. Not on the bed, behind it, standing where the shadows pooled near the closet door. It didn't look at the camera. It looked at me, and I understood, in a cold, sinking way, that the webcam wasn't turning on by itself. It was being turned on by something that wanted to be seen. I didn't look away from the screen. That was the mistake. I can see it now, the way you see a wrong turn on a map after you've already driven it. The moment the webcam feed showed that shape near the closet, my mind did what minds do. It tried to understand it by studying it, by giving it detail, by letting it exist. The figure was thin, but not fragile. It had the suggestion of shoulders, a head, arms at its sides. No face I could make out, no clothing, just a darkness that seemed thicker than the room around it. The closet door behind it was shut, but the shadow pooled there as if the corner itself had depth. I forced myself to blink. When my eyes opened, the feed was unchanged. The figure still stood there. I whispered, "No," not because I expected it to listen, but because I needed to hear my own voice in the room. On the laptop screen, the audio meter moved slightly, as if the webcam mic had picked me up. The figure didn't react. Then the timestamp in the corner of the feed jumped, not forward, not by minutes, by seconds, unevenly, 1:58:03, 1:58:09, 1:58:14, like time was being skipped in small bites. My throat tightened. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight, aiming the beam at the closet. The closet area lit up clearly. The door, the carpet, my laundry basket. Everything exactly where it should be. No figure. I swung the light back to the laptop screen. The figure was still there in the webcam feed, standing in the same spot, unmoved by the sudden brightness that should have changed the shadows. My hand began to shake. I got out of bed. The room felt colder near the floor, not in a dramatic way, just enough to make my skin prickle. I crossed to the desk in fast, quiet steps, keeping my eyes mostly on the real closet rather than the screen, as if looking directly at the feed might encourage it. The laptop lid was open at a careful angle, like it had been lifted by someone who didn't want the hinge to creak. The paper I'd taped over the webcam was still in place, but the feed was clear anyway. That made me feel stupid for ever thinking a piece of paper mattered. I slammed the lid shut. The room went dark again, except for the tiny webcam light. It stayed on. I reached for the power button and held it down. Nothing happened. No shutdown screen, no fan spin down, no little chirp of the system powering off. The light stayed on, steady and calm, like my actions were irrelevant. I grabbed the laptop with both hands. It was colder than it should have been. Not just cool plastic. Cold in a way that felt like it had been sitting outside. I carried it to the kitchen. The overhead light there was harsh and bright, making the rest of the apartment feel less ambiguous. I set the laptop on the table and stared at it like it might blink. The webcam light finally turned off. I waited for relief. It didn't come. I stood there in the kitchen for a long time, breathing slowly, trying to convince myself it was a hardware malfunction. A stuck circuit, a short, something rational, but hardware doesn't open itself. Hardware doesn't show a live feed with a timestamp that bites itself apart. I didn't go back to bed. I sat at the kitchen table until morning, lights on, laptop closed and inert in front of me like a severed limb. When the sun rose, I felt almost normal again. The daylight didn't make what happened less real, but it made it feel further away, like it belonged to a night version of the world that couldn't exist under a blue sky. I called in sick and spent the morning on the phone with a friend who knows computers better than I do. I didn't tell her everything. I told her the truth wrapped in safer language. My webcam light was turning on. My laptop was acting weird. I thought I might be compromised. Disconnect it from everything, she said immediately. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, all of it. And if it turns on while it's offline, you've got a hardware issue or something very odd. Something odd, I repeated quietly. She talked me through steps, router logs, device lists, permissions, booting into safe mode. We met that afternoon at a coffee shop. In public, with people around. The story sounded more reasonable. Just tech paranoia, a laptop acting up, the kind of thing you solve and forget. Back home, I followed her advice. I removed the Wi-Fi card. I disabled Bluetooth. I wiped the system and reinstalled everything from scratch. I changed passwords on my phone, my email, my work accounts. I checked my router's connected devices like a person checking door locks after hearing a noise. Everything was clean. No unknown logins, no strange processes, no remote access tools. That night, I didn't bring the laptop into the bedroom. I left it in the living room, closed, battery still removed, sitting on the floor under the lamp like an object that had to remain in sight. I went to bed with my phone on the nightstand and the closet door open, because a closed door suddenly felt like an invitation to imagination. I told myself the worst part was over. At 1:58 a.m., my phone buzzed. Not a call, not a text. A notification from an app I hadn't opened in months. The camera app. A simple banner. Camera is in use. My skin went cold. I grabbed the phone and swiped it open, fingers clumsy. The camera app wasn't open. Nothing was running. I checked permissions. All normal. Then, on the lock screen, a small green dot appeared near the top, an indicator that something was using the camera. I stared at it until my eyes burned. The dot stayed. I turned the phone over, pointing the camera into my mattress, and watched the dot. It moved. Not on the screen, physically. The dot remained in the same place, but the sensation was unmistakable. Something had just shifted the phone's camera angle, like a gentle nudge. My mouth went dry. I sat up, holding the phone like a fragile thing, and scanned the room with the screen brightness low. Nothing. The closet door was open. The dark inside looked ordinary. Hangers, a coat, the empty space behind them. The green dot stayed lit. I went into the phone's settings and toggled camera permissions off for everything. I disabled them system-wide. I turned the phone off completely and set it back down. In the darkness, the laptop in the living room clicked softly. Not loud enough to be a mechanical sound, more like plastic settling. The apartment felt too still after that, like it was waiting for me to decide what to do next. I lay back down and kept my eyes open until they started to water. At some point, exhaustion tugged at the edges of my focus, that dangerous softening, the moment between being awake and letting go. I fought it. But my body is not a machine. It doesn't stay on command forever. My eyes closed for a few seconds. When I opened them again, the bedroom looked the same, but the air felt different. The way it feels when someone has entered a room without making a sound. A subtle pressure, as if the space had become slightly more crowded. I sat up slowly. On the far wall, where my dark TV screen reflected a faint outline of my bed, there was a second shape standing behind me. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't clear. It was only a density in the reflection, a vertical form where there shouldn't have been one. I didn't move. In the reflection, it didn't move either. For a long minute, we stayed like that, me staring at the black glass, my heart thudding, the reflected shape standing quietly behind the outline of my body. Then, very slowly, it leaned closer, toward the reflected bed, toward the reflected me, as if testing how near it could get without being seen directly. My throat tightened with a sudden, humiliating thought. It was careful, like it didn't want to wake me, like it wanted me to drift again. I reached for the lamp and snapped it on. The reflection flattened into normality. The black glass showed only my room and my own pale face, but the feeling of being crowded remained. I didn't sleep after that. I walked the apartment, turning on every light, checking corners like there might be something to catch. Everything looked normal. Too normal. When I reached the living room, the laptop was open. Not wide, just enough to show the desktop. The webcam feed filled the screen, and in the corner timestamp, it read 1:58 a.m. Even though my phone, when I checked it with shaking hands, read 3:26. I stood there staring at the contradiction, at the calm, unblinking insistence of that time. Then I saw the figure again, standing near my bedroom doorway in the webcam view, positioned so the camera could see just enough of the hall. It wasn't looking at the bed this time. It was looking straight at the laptop, like it knew exactly where it was visible, like it understood the difference between the room and the image of the room. And for the first time, I felt something underneath my fear that was worse than fear. A sense of being studied, as if whatever was using my camera wasn't trying to scare me at all. It was practicing how to be captured. After that night, I stopped trusting what counted as here. The apartment still looked the same in daylight. Same scuffed floor near the couch. Same faint crack in the ceiling above the kitchen sink. Same desk in the corner of the bedroom where the laptop sat closed, powerless, supposedly inert. But the sense of location, of where things truly existed, had shifted. I began to feel like I was living in two versions of the apartment at once. The one I moved through with my body, and the one that existed inside screens. The second one felt quieter, more patient, like it had time to refine itself. I stopped using devices unless I had to. No laptop, no tablet. I used my phone only for calls, keeping the screen brightness high, refusing to let it go dark long enough to become reflective. When I wasn't using it, I left it face down on the table. Still, the sense of being watched didn't fade. It changed. I started noticing gaps, small ones at first. I'd walk into the kitchen and forget why I was there. I'd sit down on the couch and realize minutes had passed without memory of them. Not full blackouts, nothing dramatic, but little skips that left me uneasy. Every time it happened, I checked the time, and every time I noticed something wrong. Clocks disagreed. The microwave would read 2:01 while my phone insisted it was 2:06. The wall clock drifted backward by a minute, then corrected itself. Once, I watched the second hand pause, hesitate, then jump ahead like it had been nudged. I started writing things down. Not thoughts, not theories, times. 1:57, normal 1:58. Feeling of pressure, 1:59. Awareness shifts. The pattern repeated too cleanly to ignore. 1:58 wasn't just when the webcam turned on, it was when attention changed. Late one night, still unable to sleep, I sat on the edge of the bed with the lights on and the laptop across the room, closed but visible. I stared at it, waiting, not drifting, not blinking more than necessary. At 1:57, nothing happened. At 1:58, the room felt subtly flatter, like depth had been reduced by a fraction, like I was standing too close to a screen instead of inside a space. The laptop didn't open. The webcam light didn't turn on. Something else did. The sound changed. The apartment grew quieter, but not in a peaceful way. More like audio had been dampened, filtered. I could still hear the refrigerator hum, but it felt farther away, less important. I looked down at my hands. They felt slow. Not numb, just delayed. Like they belonged to an image of me rather than the source. I stood up quickly, needing to break the sensation. Across the room, the laptop lid lifted by itself. Only an inch. The screen glowed faintly. I didn't move closer. I didn't have to. I could see it clearly from where I stood. The webcam feed was live again. But this time, the angle was wrong. It wasn't showing the room from the desk. It was showing the room from higher up, from a corner near the ceiling, looking down. I felt a wave of dizziness roll through me. The perspective was unmistakable, like the view from a security camera that shouldn't exist. I saw the bed, the desk, the doorway, and I saw myself standing in the center of the room. I looked thinner on the screen, less defined. The edges of my body blurred slightly, as if the image hadn't fully decided where I ended. Behind me, near the wall, was the figure. It was clearer now. Still featureless, still dark, but its shape had improved. The proportions were more accurate, the stance more natural. It stood the way someone stands when they know they're being observed and are comfortable with it. I turned toward the laptop. On the screen, I did the same, but a split second later. The delay was small, but undeniable. I raised my right hand. On the screen, the figure raised its right hand first. Then I did. My chest tightened painfully. The figure didn't copy me anymore. It anticipated. The webcam feed zoomed in slightly, not mechanically, but deliberately, tightening the frame around the two of us. The timestamp in the corner flickered. 1:58, 1:58, 1:58. It didn't change. I understood then what the recordings were for. Not surveillance, calibration. Every time the camera turned on, every time I watched myself being watched, it refined the difference between me and the image. Learned which movements belonged where, which awareness went with which body. I stepped back. The figure stepped forward. The distance between us in the frame closed, even though in the room we hadn't touched. I felt a strange tug behind my eyes, like a pressure pulling my focus inward. My thoughts slowed. The edges of the room softened. The laptop screen felt sharper than reality. "No," I whispered, and the sound felt thin, like it had passed through a filter. On the screen, the figure tilted its head. Curious? Patient. The webcam light brightened slightly. Not more intense, more certain. I forced myself to look away from the screen, turning my head toward the bedroom door, grounding myself in something solid. The hallway looked normal. The carpet pattern steady. The doorframe straight. Behind me, the laptop made a soft sound. Not a click. A breath. I didn't turn around. I knew that if I saw the screen again in that moment, something would finish aligning. That the gap between me and the image would collapse. I grabbed my jacket and keys and left the apartment without shutting the laptop. The hallway outside felt louder than it ever had. Too bright, too alive. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, moving fast, lungs burning, needing motion, needing friction. Outside, the cold night air hit my face and snapped something back into place. I stood on the sidewalk shaking, staring up at my dark apartment windows. Nothing moved. No glow. No light. I told myself I'd go to a hotel, a friend's place, anywhere with no screens, no devices, to no reflective black glass waiting to become something else. But even as I thought it, a heavier realization settled in. It wasn't tied to the apartment anymore. It was tied to me. Because as I stood there on the sidewalk, catching my breath, I felt it again. That subtle flattening of space. That quiet shift of attention. And I knew that somewhere, on some screen I hadn't thought to disable, a camera was waking up, and it was already very good at recognizing my face. I didn't go back to the apartment that night. I walked until my legs ached, until the city thinned out and the streets lost their names. I found a small motel near the edge of town, the kind with yellow lights, stained carpet, and a front desk clerk who didn't ask questions. I paid in cash. I asked for a room with no smart TV. Inside, I unplugged everything I could find. The television cord, the phone by the bed, even the digital clock on the nightstand. I left the lamps on and sat on the edge of the mattress, breathing, waiting for my body to remember how to feel like it belonged entirely to me again. For a while, it worked. The room felt solid, present. No screens reflecting dark shapes. No faint LEDs glowing where they shouldn't. I let myself lie down fully for the first time in days. Sleep came fast. Too fast. I dreamed of standing in front of a mirror that wasn't really a mirror, more like a pane of glass. On the other side was a room identical to mine, except slightly wrong. Angles just a bit off, shadows too precise. And in the center of that room stood someone who looked exactly like me, staring back with a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. When I woke, my heart was racing. The motel room was quiet, lamps still on. No strange lights, no sounds. Relief washed over me, thin but real. Then I noticed the phone on the nightstand. I hadn't brought one. It was modern, black, screen dark, but faintly reflective. I stared at it without touching it, my mind scrambling for explanations that wouldn't come. Slowly, the screen lit up on its own. A familiar interface appeared, a camera app. The front-facing camera was active. On the screen, I saw my face, but not the way a camera normally shows you. Slightly delayed, slightly distorted. This image was too steady, too patient. I didn't move. On the screen, the image of me smiled. Just a small adjustment at the corners of the mouth. Practiced, controlled. Below the image, a timestamp glowed softly. 1:58 a.m. I felt the pull again, that inward tug, like my awareness was being gently reeled toward the screen. The room flattened, the edges softened. The phone felt heavier, more important than anything else. This was the final step. I understood it now. The cameras weren't watching me. They were holding me. Every recording, every reflection, every moment I stared back at myself through glass and pixels. It created a version of me that didn't need a body the way I did. A version that lived comfortably inside frames and feeds and timestamps that never had to move forward. I had given it my face, my movements, my habits, and now it was offering me rest. I don't know how long I stood there, holding the phone at arm's length, fighting the urge to look closer. My muscles trembled. My vision blurred. With a sound that felt louder than it should have, I dropped the phone face down onto the carpet. The effect was immediate. The pressure snapped. The room regained its depth. The motel lights hummed back into importance. I staggered backward and sat hard on the bed, gasping like I'd surfaced from deep water. I didn't turn the phone over. I left the room before sunrise. I didn't return to my apartment. I didn't pack. I didn't shut anything down properly. I abandoned the place like you abandon a house with a gas leak, knowing that staying one more minute would be worse than losing what was inside. I changed cities. I changed jobs. I downgraded my life until it barely involved screens at all. No webcams, no smart devices, no front-facing cameras, if I could help it.
Well, I bought an old phone with no apps and a laptop so outdated it struggled to connect to modern networks. It helped. Mostly. But sometimes, late at night, in places where reflections are unavoidable, I catch it. In dark windows, in turned-off screens. In the black glass of a TV someone forgot to unplug. A face that looks like mine, but calmer. More settled, as if it's already where it wants to be. And I understand now why it was never aggressive, why it waited, why it practiced, because it doesn't need to chase anyone. People bring themselves to it every day. They sit alone in the dark, staring into glowing rectangles, letting their awareness slip just enough for something else to hold it. If you ever notice your webcam light turn on when you didn't ask it to, if you ever see yourself on a screen before you remember moving, don't stare. Don't try to understand. And whatever you do, don't let it learn you completely. If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing for more long-form horror narrations. You have been listening to American Haunted Tales.
Thank you for watching.